I'm going to talk about today an ancient and mysterious manuscript, one whose decipherment has confounded me for many years. It really is to paraphrase Churchill, a riddle wrapped in a archival plastic envelope and stuffed into a bookcase. I've talked about this very briefly on a video interview some time ago, and people wrote me and asked questions if I could go into more depth about it. So here's your in-depth, as well as put some pictures online so they could look more closely at it. I will put those photos on my website, and I'll give a link below to them. Before I talk about this manuscript, I do want to talk about ancient manuscripts on the internet. I'm besieged by phone calls, texts, and emails with videos of purportedly ancient manuscripts discovered in the Middle East that often show biblical scenes, sometimes Hebrew written on gold, on lead, or deerskin. These are unfortunately invariably fake. And like Berenson said about modern art, they are sold by the unscrupulous and bought by the utterly bewildered. And people of good faith do contact me to authenticate them and possibly to sell them on their behalf. The reason I bring that up is this is not one of those type of manuscripts. The problem is those manuscripts have sort of poisoned the well, and when you go to contact a scholar in the field, an epigrapher, a paleographer, with something potentially very interesting, their immediate reaction is, oh no, we're not one of those manuscripts. So there is now a barrier to get through to prove the legitimacy, even for an inquiry. So if you have one of those manuscripts, you're always welcome to reach out. I'm always friendly, but you cannot ask one question, and that is, can I put you in touch with someone with $10 million in a suitcase that will meet you in the shade of the Kasbah of Morocco? Where did I get this manuscript? Well, a number of years ago, I was invited to the estate of an important Middle Eastern scholar who had passed away. And when I went there were many items of interest. One of them was this, which had been very proudly displayed upon in a frame above his desk, and you could see old photos from the 1970s of people gathered around discussing it. And it was in a manila envelope, very carefully labeled 5th to 6th century. So I was very excited to purchase it. Unfortunately, there were probably papers, or information he had kept about what he had discovered about it. But that had been tossed out either by family members or by, antique dealers that had gotten to the estate, prior to when I had arrived. This well could be a forgery. First, let's look at it, its physical characteristics. It is a bifolium on vellum of sorts with some loss. And it's written in a mysterious alternating black and red script with a couple, strange pictograms on it. And when I say this could be a forgery, I don't mean in the sense of those other forgeries on the internet I talked about before. I mean in the sense of a 19th century antiquarian forgery. Of course, in Victorian times, there was an insatiable appetite and irrepressible desire for the exotic. And along with that, of course, there were many unscrupulous people. It was a godsend to them, to satiate the insatiable and provide things, to the market. One of my favorite forgeries of the period are those of Moses Wilhelm Shapira, the 19th century antiquities dealer in Jerusalem. And in 1882, 15 strips were reportedly found near the Dead Sea of the Book of Deuteronomy. one or something of them actually showed a lost 11th commandment. I think that was not to pay too much attention to the other 10. No, it was actually something to do with, not having enmity towards your brother. But Moses Shapira offered the collection to the British Museum for the astounding sum, I think it was, of $1 million. And this generated so much excitement that they had an exhibition and thousands of people attended them. So you can see how remarkable it is, how much excitement there is for ancient manuscripts, especially those that might touch upon biblical subjects. At that exhibit, the French Orientalist Clermont-Ganneau exposed them as forgeries. He believed, I think they were cut from Yemenite Torahs and fabricated. It's not clear if that was true or not, but regardless, Shapira, his reputation was torn to shreds, and in ignominy in a hotel in Rotterdam, he eventually committed a suicide from the ramifications of the affair. What is particularly interesting about if they are indeed forgeries, were that they anticipated the discovery of the real ancient manuscripts, the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran in the 1940s. And interestingly also, some modern scholars have revisited those manuscripts. Now, we don't have the original Shapira manuscripts. After he died, they were auctioned, I think, at Sotheby's a couple years later in the 1880s for a trifling sum of 15 guineas or so. And nobody knows the whereabouts of them since, but I'm looking. But they did do some drawings of them during the period, and based on those drawings, some scholars do now actually believe they could have been authentic. So the British Museum may have sold off one of the greatest treasures of all time there. But this, again, could be a great forgery of the period. They did not have the tools of scientific investigation necessarily like they do today. Now, when you talk about ancient manuscripts and forgeries, you can also think about the Grandmama, the most famous one of them all, the Voynich manuscript. The Voynich manuscript is so famous not just in book circles, but in popular culture. It's like when you go to a party and you're allowed to bring a +1 manuscript, you don't have to go around introducing it to everybody. They all know who it is. The manuscript was originally found or sold, named after the Polish antiquarian Voynich. It landed eventually in the hands of H.P. Krauss, the famous American bookseller, who then donated it to the Beinecke Library at Yale, where it permanently rests. And since they acquired it, it has been the pleasure dome for cryptographers and code breakers ever since that want to delve into deciphering its mysterious language and pictures. Its authenticity has been questioned over the years. I don't know where the debate sits now. I think generally it's thought to be an original medieval manuscript, although that has not been conclusively proven as far as I know. And there is even still some suspicion that Voynich himself may have fabricated it. Anyway, I don't want to go too deeply into the Voynich manuscript. There are plenty of books about that, but I did want to just to touch on the allure of authenticating both something potentially genuine as well as, a potential lost, language that invites code breaking. So if this was, let's just say, a genuine manuscript, I have not been able to find a philologist, epigrapher, or paleographer that has been able to decipher the language. And it could indeed be one of the last, if not the last surviving remnant of a lost language. When I think of lost languages, I think of the great Mount Everest of deciphering lost languages, that of Linear B in the 19th century. Linear B was, found on clay tablets, a syllabic type of language in the Palace of Knossos in Crete by Arthur Evans from the Ashmolean Museum. And the world was very excited for many years about deciphering this mysterious language. Eventually, the code was cracked, I think, by the who was it? The woman classicist Alice Kober, not Klober, and also the British architect Michael Ventris. So they were able to prove it was a type of Proto or early Greek, I guess, when the Greek invaders came originally to Crete. What was interesting about that is even though they deciphered it, it was probably a very locally used language for a specific purpose, maybe an administrative purpose, and didn't have widespread use, which is why it did not survive. For some reason, that is my innate sense about this particular manuscript, that it had some sort of like funeral purpose or was just used very locally. There's even, a linear A, which has not been deciphered because there are too few surviving fragments of that. Lost languages, even today, of course, are constantly being found. I think I read a couple years ago at the monastery in St. Katerina in Sinai. They were looking at old manuscripts they have there, specifically studying what's known as palimpsest, which is when you have the old vellum, because it was so expensive that they would scratch off the writing and write anew on top of it. And with modern techniques, whether I think it's like X-ray fluorescence, I don't know if that's the right scientific term, I should just say Superman vision, they're able to see and decipher languages underneath. And I think a couple years ago they found a lost language, some sort of a Syrian Christian Aramaic, that was underneath one of these reused manuscript pages. So the study of lost ancient languages is certainly fascinating, and new discoveries can still be made. So that is all I know about this particular manuscript. Again, if you are an epigrapher, a paleographer, a philologist, or you have friends or a love of solving great mysteries, do look at the pictures. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, thank you for listening and letting me express some of the joys of rare book hunting and rare book dealing. And certainly tune in next time.